Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey there, lovely radicals. Way to go, we survived Easter. Okay, now I'm totally projecting my stuff onto all of you, which is totally unprofessional. Just because Easter is always a bit of a lonely time for me, or it has been for the past 2 years. You know, being a single weirdo with no family can sometimes be a bit of a stretch those 4 days. So, you know, the trap I usually fall into is that I project all of my dreams onto everybody else. I assume that all of you had a fantastic time with loved ones, hiding home-colored eggs in beautiful gardens, chilling out, losing your marbles over heavenly chocolatey Easter bunny ears, and piling up chocolate egg wrappers. Right. You know, for some it is just a welcome few off days of work. For others, it's something to, you know, spend some time in bed and rest. Others take a trip. Others have the same problem as I do. Like, how the hell do I spend those 4 days? So, yeah, I was falling into the trap of comparison once again. And by the way, I don't know, maybe it's a Swiss thing too. I don't know about you, but usually around Easter and Christmas and stuff, I always find it pretty hard to find people, you know, for as small a thing as going for coffee. It seems like everybody is busy, like with children or taking trips or going to relatives or in-laws. I don't know, but it just always seems like everybody is busy around those holidays, and it might be true. So, boo-hoo, I'm not complaining. I'm just glad that it's over and that people are available again for hugs and coffee and stuff. Anyway, remember where we left off last week? I was right in the middle of telling you why you're a badass. So if you missed that part, quick, go listen to it. There's no way you want to miss it. It's episode 38 with the amazing Reagan Chastain. You want to listen to that one. And speaking of missing an episode, make sure you do subscribe to Life Unrestricted on iTunes or your favorite podcast app, because then you'll get every episode right to your phone when it's hot off the press. Oh, and while you're on iTunes, may I ask you to please, s'il vous plaît, write a nice review? Here's how it works. Type in Life Unrestricted to the search bar on your podcast app, whether you're subscribed or not. This is just the iTunes go around, make it complicated way of doing things. So you have to type in Life Unrestricted to the search bar, and then when the whole show pops up, you click on the large show image, and then from there you get a selection of tabs. One of them being ratings and reviews. And there you go, type away. By you doing that, other people might find it easier to find the show because iTunes seems to rank shows higher that have a lot of good reviews, which is not surprising, I guess. Anyway, thank you. And if you want to be a contributor of this show, it would also be very lovely if you went to patreon.com/lifeunrestricted to have a look at my show, and maybe you feel inclined to support it with a financial pledge, which is of course no strings attached. You can cancel anytime you're kind of fed up, which of course you'll never be. And so if you want to, please go have a look at patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. That's where my supporters hang out, and I'm extremely grateful for all of them. So yeah, I just wanted to plug that selfishly. And before I introduce you to today's guest, here's part 2 of me trying to convince you why you, lovely radical, are a badass. Are you settled in, nice and comfy? All right, here goes. So, you're a badass because you're starting to wake up. You're waking up to all sorts of bullshit that's happening around you and also in your mind. And waking up to all those false limiting beliefs that are building blocks of the foundation of our everyday lives, seeing how they could hold us back from fully evolving into an unrestricted human being, well, that's painful. Facing some of that stuff is not for sissies. Maybe just like me, you were in denial about even having those beliefs or simply unaware of them. Or at least you certainly didn't have an idea to what extent they are running our show. Those old beliefs are the basic programming that someone passed along to us way back when we were too small to have an active defense against them. We just soaked them up, just as kids do. We took them as truths and they got stored away somewhere deep in our subconscious. And now that I'm becoming more and more self-aware, I see stuff that I previously didn't or didn't want to see. I'm sure you heard the brilliant saying, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." And oh boy, that one's so spot on. So in case you are reacting with denial, I feel for you. See, had you asked me like 4 years ago if I had the core belief that I was not lovable, I probably would have said, "Are you kidding? I am somebody." And I probably would have come up with all sorts of flashy reasons why that couldn't be possible. Yet now that I'm learning to shine some light into my darkest corners, I see that this is very much one of my deepest core beliefs. This is the stuff that I find in the scary belief territory that built itself on the basis of my childhood experiences. Those are the beliefs that, as long as they're not made conscious, color our life canvases day in and day out. Our relationships, our perceptions of the world, our way of relating to our bodies, our way of interacting with our surroundings, our way with money, work, play. You know, the old stories about not being good enough, not being enough, generally, not being lovable, not being allowed to feel good for too long, having to prove myself to be allowed to coexist with others, having to change myself to get love and respect, which, given our culture's insistence that thinner equals happier and thinner equals healthier and all that bullshit, made me focus on my body. And that cost me like 20 years of my life. Great, huh? And then there was the whole sad notion that says, if it's easy, it's not worth anything. You know, I'm discovering all of those old beliefs that I was holding on to, and they're all pretty grim, and they're all pretty joy-defying. So I think you'd agree that it's worth questioning those. And as they say, it's either healing our wounds or ending up being run by them. It's true. For years, I just said, I don't have a problem. I might have had a horrible childhood, but I just came away unscathed. I made myself believe that I didn't have a problem at all. And I was totally run by all of those old beliefs. So it took me much too long and a massive breakdown to stand up and say, okay, I'm facing those demons now. And I just hope that people don't have to wait so long to do that, because life is still happening and you might just build it on beliefs that serve you better. Because our old subconscious programming, when unquestioned, really will be the goggles through which we experience our everyday life, our interactions. As I said, how we relate to ourselves and others, and how safe we feel in the world. So let me double down on my original statement here. That's why you're a badass. You're a badass for mustering up the courage to start shining your mag light into some of those dark, stinky corners in the basement of your mind, just as I am. And together we're starting to clean up some of those old messes, sort of doing that long overdue update on our mental programming. That's one hell of a ballsy process. It takes patience, unfortunately, since that's not my forte, and it takes tears and resolve and compassion. And that's a lot harder than to just blindly follow the masses, by which I mean society and diet culture and forced compliance. So the fact that you are getting ready to Forrest Gump your way out of this mess that only wants to keep you small, limited, and powerless and uneducated, that's pretty badass. No arguing that. Body-obsessed people never get further than, well, just that. They're all believe that their body is what defines them. So their body and its appearance, it's their outer limit. And I mean, if Stephen Hawking had that kind of thinking going on, he probably wouldn't have gotten around to developing his breakneck theories in theoretical physics, would he? So yes, we can do better than being stuck in body obsession and appearance fears, even if the world sends us a different message. It's not about pleasing the world. It's about courageously stepping into who we are and looking for our people. You're not for everybody, and everybody's not for you, and that's the beauty of life. It's about finding like-minded people who share your values and who want to grow with you. And they are out there. They're not the mass, though. I realized that whatever I perform that doesn't align with my values is not providing any safety, which sounds like a paradox, but it's true. I might fly under the radar and be able to swim with the masses, but I can never feel entirely comfortable because I know that I'm not perfect. You know it, and you know it. We will always be too intimidating for some, too shy for others, too big for some, too small for others, too complicated for some, too naive for others, too bold for some, too loud for others. Whatever it is, whoever you try to be that is not you will eventually make you feel more lonely and more shameful and more feeling like a fraud. There's no way to be that protects us from being rejected. And that's a good thing. It's just life. You don't need to be anything else but you. That's enough. And that's a big truth to swallow. And we have been programmed in another way, so that'll take a while to reprogram. So you, lovely radical, are a badass for letting yourself be more critical about the messages you have been taught about your body, and that you're ready to find the you in yourself back, the real you that was always there. You simply lost touch with it when all of the programming started to pile on top of your soul. But that gem of a unique being that you are is still there. You'll find her, or you'll find him. And it is the perfectly imperfect human being that you'll grow to love, warts and all. Because we all are just that, everyday people with worries and flaws and ideas and desires. You're a badass for trying to ditch living like a faded black and white copy of your own self. Oh, and while I'm at it, what also makes you a badass is that it's not easy being an early adopter for a new paradigm. So keeping your footing and not being lured back into diet culture and all its messages, that's hard. And sometimes the only thing that keeps us going might be the knowledge that by changing our own beliefs, we are lighting the way to freedom for others. And at the end of the day, what makes a badass is the willingness to lift the veil that covers our belief system and start questioning some stuff. A badass is a badass when he or she is willing to recognize that we might have been wrong, but that we can change. And that will inspire others to work on their own liberation. And that's a pretty good virus to spread, I would say. So, you're a badass. I hope we agree on that. By the way, has anyone counted how many times I have said the word badass in last week's and today's episode? And hey, badass, it's time for the show. In today's episode, we all have a chance to meet Robyn Goldberg from Los Angeles. Over the last 19 years, Robyn has developed her own practice in Beverly Hills, where she specializes in disordered eating, eating disorders, health at every size, medical conditions, preventative nutrition, and pregnancy nutrition. She serves as a nutrition consultant for the Celiac Disease Foundation, And she is currently the eating disorder specialist at the Control Center and has several body image eating disorder groups at Sober Livings in Los Angeles. Robyn also teaches the nutrition classes for the Motion Picture Wellness Program. She is a contributing author that has been quoted in countless publications, and she has made appearances on national TV shows as a nationally known speaker in the eating disorder community, promoting positive body image, weight stigma, and size diversity. The first question I asked Robyn was how she remembers being in a body as a kid.
I knew, Mira, this was a general question that you typically ask. I was regrouping in my brain over the weekend here. So, growing up in Los Angeles and such, I was always one of the tallest kids. I think to myself, like in elementary school, I was always put to the back of the assembly line, like when there was a fire drill or when there was like the choir for the Christmas shows. And, when I think of those types of incidences, I always felt awkward and uncomfortable just because I was just tall and just genetically bigger. And with that, compared to the other girls, I was always one of the first picked to play sports just because of my height. And, I had bigger hands, and I think I went through puberty first, but I always felt, uncomfortable. I actually pulled out some albums over the weekend to look at this from actually the age 10 to 13. That was about it. I think like a lot of kids, they go through like this awkward stage. I was definitely, I definitely had my father's legs. I had these bird legs. And, I had a big torso, and I had this, full face. And my mom was a professional dancer. She was the only clothed cage dancer in Las Vegas. So kind of reflecting back, the way I dressed in, the years of like 10 to 13, I always wore clothes that were bigger than my body, not only because I felt uncomfortable, but again, being a child of the 70s, I think, felt uncomfortable that, my mom, not only was she a dancer, but imagine someone, when she wasn't dancing, wore clothes that were conformed, like the cleavage coming up and like tight. And I think it made me even more self-conscious because I was a tomboy and I was very athletic, and it just made me hyper aware of it. So looking at, and people to this day always say like, oh, Robyn, does your mom still wear a tennis skirt even when there wasn't a tennis match? So even all my birthday parties, my mom was always in a tennis skirt or like a leotard dancing. And so I think it made me feel more uncomfortable and self-conscious. And to this day, I'm a very conservative dresser, and made me hide in my body as a result.
I can understand why. You had such an extreme being modeled that you sort of went into the other direction. It was either go after that or just the opposite.
For sure. The funny thing about this is that now, many, many years later, I, look at these pictures, and I was put into, all these dance classes, tap, jazz, ballet, rebelled against all of them, Merit, never clicked with dancing. I had 2 left feet, felt awkward in all of it. I excelled in basketball, volleyball. I had great hand-eye coordination. But again, like the dancing, I remember, we'd go on cruises and to Club Med, and my mom would be in the front doing like electric slide. And to this day, I listen to her with like Zumba and all. She can like jive, but I completely went the opposite way with all of that. So it was just very interesting just to think about being in my body, because it was the complete alternative.
Do you remember the reaction of your classmates?
I was definitely accepted amongst sport. I was able to bond with people always amongst athletics. No awkwardness there, but always when it came to like school dances, and even to this day as an adult, if I'll go to a party or a wedding or something with my husband, I'm that person who will like schmooze with you on the side of the room. And, my husband's like the total dancer. And I think I've, through many years of therapy, have been able to dance, but I probably have like 3 moves I can do. I was never, the dancer. I'm able to like laugh at myself and have fun and be somewhat comfortable, but I'm not that person who could just like rock out where like I could see, my husband dance with my mother. That was just not my forte, but give me a tennis racket or give me a ball and I could just like kick your ass.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you're swell on a basketball court, whereas, maybe the rest of the class or your mother would look pretty out of place.
Well, she was a tomboy too. I mean, she actually could wear both hats, but that was just never my area. So the funny thing was I was asking her this weekend about, the pictures. She's like, yeah, that was the generation to wear bigger clothes. I was like, well, you remember, Mom, I used to buy shirts that were bigger because I felt uncomfortable in my body. Like I remember vividly, we would go to a store and because I never liked shopping, I was one of those women. To this day, I'm
Me
like
too.
much better. I would be, how you'd go to a department store and you'd see all the men sitting on the couch, like waiting for their wives.
Yeah, that's me. Like, can we please just go?
Yeah, that was totally me. Like, I would be sitting with my father waiting for my mother. And to this day, like, I find something I like, I buy one in every color. So
I used to have a time when I bought sneakers, like 3 pairs of them. So whenever one pair was old, so that I wouldn't have to bother, like, which ones were the ones that I liked? And I totally understand what you mean. For me, it's clothes shopping and shoe shopping is not cool.
Yeah, and I remember, like, with jeans, because I was so long-waisted, we'd get, like, men's jeans and then we'd have them altered because like the women's jeans didn't fit me appropriately. And I was just so uncomfortable because I was so tall. And so with the shirts, she would want them to be like, more fitted and tight on me. And I'm like more flat chested. That's just me. And she'd be like, oh, well, you could get the smaller size, and it just made me uncomfortable. So to this day, when I'll buy something, she's like, no, Robyn, that's not tight enough on you. So it's interesting to be able to see, like, she'll put something on, it's like, the tighter, the better. For me, it's like, I just want to be comfortable. So
feels like you were my sister or something, because I have a friend of mine.
We're soul sisters,
yeah.
Merritt.
I mean, I'm not a tall person, so I had to usually, buy jeans and then shorten them. The legs were always much too long for me, and usually they were too tight for my thighs. And then I also had my friend. It was a friend of mine because my mother is not alive anymore. And a friend of mine, she always says, why don't you get a smaller size, especially for my upper half? So T-shirts and sweaters and stuff. And I usually, just out of habit, I always buy the larger sizes because it freaks me out when stuff hugs my belly too much or my chest. I don't know why, but it is a feeling of self-consciousness. And I just don't like to be exposed like that. So yeah. I was a tomboy as well. And I still, to this day, as you say, I feel more comfortable in sort of largish, sweaters and like baggy stuff and yoga pants. And if it needs any special treatment in the washing, I won't buy it because I just want to put everything in and wash it at the same temperatures to have a pretty boyish attitude towards.
Well, that's why there's the dry cleaner to help.
Yeah. Yeah, I just like it. The more uncomplicated it is, the better. Sure. And so for me, it's like okay to have like 2 or 3 pants and 2 or 3 sweaters. I have more than that, but I find myself regularly putting on the same stuff over and over and over and over again until it kind of breaks.
Yes.
Yeah, and I find that usually women aren't like that, and that makes me feel like an oddball. So I felt like I related to you so much, like, oh, there's another woman who doesn't like shopping.
The funny thing is, Merritt, when I go to a foreign country, I'm more open to it, but it's for a specific item. I can't just wander. It's like for that handbag or for these shoes, but it's for a concentrated amount of time.
Me too. And especially when I'm overseas, like when I was in America last year, no, the year before, it was 15. I like shopping there because it's just not like shopping, but you kind of wander around a new city or an area and then you run across something and then, wow, this is nice, I want that. But it's not like oh my God, I have to go shopping. And for me, shopping is not a numbing experience, as in I cannot use it as a drug, I'm not a shopaholic. For some people, it is a relief, stress relief, or I don't know, makes them feel better if they can go buy stuff. And that's not something that is for me. It doesn't work. It stresses me to go.
It sounds like we have a similar philosophy. In a foreign country, for me, it's like a science project. like Forrest Gump would say, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
True that. And just today, I had 2 pullovers in my hand because I was sorting out clothes. And then I found like one pullover had an L and one was an S. And the S was bigger than the L, depending on what store you buy it in.
Sure.
That it's so not reliable. I have stuff in XL that hardly fits me, and I have stuff in S that is totally comfy. So it's odd how the sizes have become totally unpredictable depending on where you buy stuff.
Yes, I have found, and I'll say this to clients. I know, I don't know if they are in Switzerland, but for some time, the Levi's company had jeans without sizes in there, and they would have fun names.
Oh, really?
And I'm misquoting it, but it would be
gorgeous and
like your thighs are beautiful or something. And a client of mine who was with me for a few years and basically became recovered from her eating disorder had committed to buying her first pair of jeans. And she walked from my office to the Levi's store and had said to the sales associate, "Could you please pick out a pair of jeans for me?" She said, "Oh, we have this new line." This was like 2 years ago. And they don't have numbers in it, but they have like positive names.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it was nice because I wish the whole fashion industry would conform to that essentially. And so she came back with these jeans and she was like, "You know what, Robyn, I've committed to cutting out all the sizes in anything that I purchase for, now on," because basically she had the same elastic pants that she would wear time and time again. Those were these drawstring ones that she would wear each time that I saw her. But I was like, that's brilliant that they came out with that. I don't know if you've encountered anything like that in any of the shops near you.
No, not at all. But that's the reason why I brought it up, because so many women get stuck in their internal size compartmentalizing. Like, I need to fit into a SL, whatever it is. And then they get hung up on that, just as with the scale. That's why Marilyn Wan's Yay scale, that's the same thing with the scale. It doesn't show any numbers.
Yes.
And no matter where you are, it just...
as a positive comment.
Yeah, it's like, you're fabulous, or stuff like that. I love this idea. Yeah.
Yes.
And that brings me to a related topic. You recently wrote a blog post about eating disorder screening for healthcare providers.
Yes.
And that often with eating disorders, what we see is not what we get. And this topic resonates a lot with me because for years, my eating disorder or disordered eating, whatever you want to call it, it went pretty much undetected simply because BMI is used as an indicator for health, which is a rabbit hole I would gladly go down with you just so that we can blow that myth up. But first, if you were to screen someone for an eating disorder, what signs would you look out for?
It's funny, Merritt, that you're bringing this up because I just want to kind of go down another detour. I gave a presentation on Thursday, the first time I was able to give this presentation to a group of 35 women physicians in this community on health at every size, educating the medical community. And I actually was able to discuss how BMI is actually,
Bullshit.
outdated, essentially, yes. And how when it was discovered in the 19th century by a Belgian statistician, it was never meant to be utilized as it is now to be able to determine height and weight, and it does not take into consideration age, gender, ethnicity, years of dieting.
It's just an average number. It's not made for
Correct.
individual use at all.
Yes. Yes, no, absolutely. And so the situation that came up with that, because as I was giving the research, I asked these doctors, I said, name one disease that an obese person has that skinny people don't have. And the room was silent. I said, there is not one. Mm-hmm. I said that someone who's obese could have diabetes, just like someone who is skinny, aching joints, heart disease, cancer. And basically, I was challenged by a couple surgeons, of course, because the surgeon's like, well, our journals basically state that for someone who has a BMI of 42, we will have a higher success rate. I said, well, let me ask you this question. Have you ever monitored the success rate of someone? Oh, because this one surgeon says, well, I will recommend Lindora or Weight Watchers or basically something radical and extreme, never working with an eating disorder treatment team. I said, have you ever tracked the success rate in regards to how long your patient will keep the weight off? And the doctor said, I have never monitored the success rate in regards to how long any of these patients will keep the weight off.
Therein lay the problem.
Well, that's exactly it. And I said, well, that is something I would recommend. I said, because my hunch is, and I tried to be very diplomatic. I said, my hunch is, I said, your patients all have eating disorders, and many of them probably have a lot of trauma. This goes way back, and I know you're all very busy and have a very limited amount of time that you can spend in the room with your patients. I said, but this goes back from a very early place in their life. They've been told what they can and cannot eat. They've had a variety of food rules. So one of them's like, well, Robyn, if I was to send one of these patients to you, I said, the first thing I would suggest is I would recommend you don't put any time constraints in regards to saying to a patient, you must lose X amount of pounds in any period of time, because that's only going to set them up for failure. And so when the doctor says, well, when a patient's complaining that, knees are hurting or back is hurting and X, Y, and Z, I said, I can completely empathize with that. But when there's a timeline, diets prove that their weight is going to come back and then some, and diets make you fatter. So she's like, well, how would you help? And I said, well, first and foremost, I would collaborate with a treatment team that I work with. I would refer them to a therapist or psychologist, and then that clinician would refer them to a psychiatrist if needed. I said, the goal of, because they learned about health at every size and intuitive eating, I said, their weight might remain the same. It might go up. I said, or it might go down. I said, I cannot predict this. I said, but the more that you are putting this pressure, I said, this is going to put them in a darker and deeper place. So all of these doctors understood, Merritt, like the idea of talking about weight and the idea of BMI is only more problematic, but the research actually stated that the reasons that people of quote unquote larger size develop medical issues is due to the inflammatory factor like C-reactive protein and C3. It's not because of their weight.
And I would say the part of this stress reaction that you're saying, the inflammatory reaction in those people could be caused by weight stigma, the fear of being shamed or of being exposed to fat-phobic comments. That is something we must never underestimate in the consideration of a person's health. Because if you're eternally stressed, because you're always being told that there's something wrong with you and with your body and with your eating, and why don't you get your shit together finally, then how would you ever feel at ease with yourself when all we need is more ease around this? And why don't we just tell people how they could maybe implement healthy behaviors into their life without ever focusing on weight Just take it off the discussion table for a minute.
Yes.
And let's ask better questions, because those people are stressed already.
Well, that's it. But I think, though, too, Merritt, with these physicians, it's a one-track mind. The idea, like, because I had opened up this talk with saying, like, how many of you have been told that you're overweight, or you've been given a look that you're overweight? And a lot of them raised their hands. And I said, well, when you are presented with that look, or you are told that, like maybe you feel like you have to fix or change something, the idea that they can remove that in their conversation, because the idea of changing a behavior is so foreign in the medical community. It's sort of like speaking Italian when you've never even learned one syllable or one piece of grammar.
Yeah, but what do they want?
You know, what they want is, like, to them, in all of their journals and medical books that they're looking at, is weight loss will prove for a higher success rate in gastric bypass. I mean, these are what these doctors were just kind of proceeding with, versus when I'm speaking about having intuitive movement and being able to find ways to have stress reduction and find ways to remove triggers in your life and improve your sleep. They're like, this all sounds wonderful in theory, Robyn, but what are we going to tell the patients when our knees are hurting? And many of them asked for me to help them with screening questions. I said I would be happy to, but then they're like, well, we have limited amount of time in the exam room with them. I mean, I could see they were anxious about that as well.
That's the problem, I think. I was going to say, if I had a choice in the matter, and that probably collides with capitalism totally, but if I had a choice in the matter, I would ask everyone, because everybody is different. And for sure, there might be people who live in, I don't know how they're called, food deserts or whatever, that we could, you know, if we could just let them know some ways of habits that they might enjoy, that we might really help them. And if they are losing weight at one stage, cool. If they don't, also cool. But there are people coming in that need a totally different advice, because they're maybe already doing too much or focusing on healthy eating too much and stressing themselves by doing that. So everybody has a story, and we need to listen to how this person is living and how we can actually help them in a way that might not be the same advice for you or for the other person.
Agreed. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I feel like it's treated as a factory. They're spelling out the same response to each person that goes through each door. It's like a conveyor belt.
Yeah. And if you're in the normal BMI range, no one asks you any questions. Whether you've been sick for 20 years with an eating disorder or not, it will never be detected. For me, it was a pure coincidence, because I had to take a new drug for my ADHD, and everything totally fell out of control with Ritalin. So my weight dropped so fast that it came to everyone's attention that now something is wrong. But the problem was there all along. It was just the medication that actually put me on the radar, because now my BMI was low enough for someone to take notice. But before, because I came from a higher weight, no one took notice in the 25 years before that, because it was always okay. I was a diet success, quote unquote, until that medication showed that I was in a very, very bad place inside my head mostly, and that I had created habits for over 25 years that were not to my very healthy development. But no one helped me, simply because they said, well, she's looking great. She successfully dieted. Well, she exercises a lot. That's great. I was the example. I was the poster child for them. Just do what she does and you'll be fine. And I'm like, but I'm suffering all the time.
Well, I think, Merritt, kind of segueing to your initial question, and with several clients of mine whose physicians have no clue that they have an eating disorder until I, allow the cat out of the bag with the client's permission, because, as you said, they look normal. One person in particular had gastric bypass, and in a very short period of time had lost 100 pounds, but chunks of hair were falling out. But again, like if the doctor doesn't ask questions, the individual is not going to disclose this information. And to be able to black out, to have bruising, these doctors don't know the eating disorder screening questions to be able to have, you could look normal and then have lanugo. It's like, I call it like fight or flight syndrome. Like your body is in starvation mode. So it's hanging on for dear life to be able to obtain those nutrients. And this was a person who just like genetically was very, very large, but again, and still was a large person, but the doctor would be like, keep going, keep losing the weight. And
oh my God, yeah. They prescribe eating disorder behavior to an already very sick person.
And was so afraid of food, Merritt, because each time it would go in was like, well, I don't think you should be eating such and such, and was deficient in so many vitamins and minerals. And also, one of the questions that I always like to ask, the individual is like, do you ever wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat? Like, as if you just got off the treadmill or the Stairmaster. It's like, oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah, I had that for a while as well. I was going through honestly 3 sets of PJs a night.
Yeah. And it's not like you're in menopause, and that's because your blood sugar's low. So that's because you've had this suboptimal dinner or evening snack. And, the positive part is like you can change this. So
I had it after binges, as if my body was like working off stuff or just developing heat. But I was never really sure. It was a few years back, like maybe 6 years ago, when I had this terrible phase of 2 years of night eating, when I woke up and couldn't go back to sleep unless I ate, and then I couldn't stop. And that was, of course, after dinner and everything. And so those were the nights when I went back to sleep and I was sweating extremely.
Wow. Yeah.
So how did that woman get help? How did you, let her doctor know what was going on?
Well, ultimately, with her therapist, she had a long-term relationship with, and I think that's important when someone's bonded to another treatment team member to be able to say, I'd love to be able to refer you to an internist that specializes in eating disorders. I think the problem, Merritt, is you can't force anyone to see anyone else. Like, when you hit your bottom in any disease, then you're going to change. So she, would see this doctor. It wasn't even like she needed to see her literally weekly, and it wasn't even monthly. So I think like many people, you're going to do things at your own timetable. And
it's breaking my heart still. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
It's difficult because some of these folks really need a higher level of care. But I think the positive part to this story is that she ultimately broke away from having those check-ins with, the gastric bypass surgeon, because it was sort of like, well, what is going to come out of those visits? Like, so...
But don't you think it would, why is there so much resistance against this Hayes logic? I would love to see at least a readiness to acknowledge that, you can only talk about weight relative to someone's genetic weight. When you ask them questions, how are they? How do they eat? How do they feel about themselves? Why isn't there at least some readiness not to go by a chart?
I think so many doctors are afraid to change because that's what they know. That's how, I don't want to say it's an older generation because, look, I was speaking to like a younger generation of doctors too. And change is tough for anybody. But what I found is that doctors, to me, that seem to be more receptive and open seem to be the pediatricians. At least, and by the way, too, Merritt, I'm going to shift back to the pediatricians. One of them said to me, well, we have to document weight for electronic medical records. What would you suggest I do? I said, you know what? Fudge it. lie. You could put whatever you've had from a previous time many years ago. I said, there's a number of doctors I work with that do that. I said, why traumatize the patient?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's really not necessary for anybody other than who is nutritionally compromised. And those are the clients. Like I had a new woman that I referred to an internist the other day. And I was like, please don't blind weigh her. I'm going to tell you her weight. She's already addicted to the scale and she's compromised to once a week. He's like, fine, I'm going to tell the medical assistant not to do it. And he's like very respectful of it. But I think it's just a standard protocol because, like, as this one doctor said, we have to for electronic medical records. So the pediatrician said to me, Robyn, what would you suggest we do? And I said, you know what? Just blind weigh the kids, because I know kids are excited to know, like, how much have I grown? How tall am I? Like, they're very innocent. They don't know anything about weight, height. It's like as they get older, the kids talk about it, but it doesn't have to start out that way. And so several of the pediatricians I know said, could you come to our office and do an in-service and re-educate our staff? And we're happy to change our whole office to blind weighs. So it's not a conversation piece. It's not made such a big deal. I said, that would be fantastic. And I feel like, Meredith, if change can happen that way, then it could be shifted to the adult population, because the pediatricians seem to be more receptive to it, at least several of the ones I've recently had conversations with.
Okay, but where is this development coming from, which is horrifying, that there are certain schools now reprimanding notes back to the parents if they let their kid have a slice of cake in their lunch bags? I'm like, this is so getting out of hand.
Yeah.
Like everybody's going to end up with disordered eating or an eating disorder if we continue to villainize food like that. And people are stressed out with being healthy and clean, and which is the thing that ends up stressing them. Everything is going out of hand with this, weight obsession.
Well, you know what? I mean, I agree with you. Like, it's normal to have a piece of cake in your lunch, and the idea of having notes sent home saying your kid had a piece of cake in their lunch and that's a problem.
Come on, this is overstepping
a boundary.
Yeah, sure. And if you villainize a food like that, watch the kid develop a high stress response to food.
Of course, they're going to feel like it's a forbidden food, and the sneaking will just start their way.
Oh, man. Tell us more about your presentation about health at every size. What did you tell them?
Well, one of the things I actually had them do is look at their own relationship with food and how it's projected onto patients. And are they equipped to work with patients who come in all shapes and sizes? And that's something that I think needs to be addressed. And
did you give examples how they can observe their own behavior and what they're projecting?
So I actually, again, it was a 30-minute PowerPoint. So we spoke about, sometimes doctors will come across and say, well, I don't eat such and such. And that will come across to a patient, of course, if your own bias towards a food or your own food discriminatory behaviors are coming out. I think it's like one has to have a neutral relationship when you're coming across with your patient, as opposed to having any biases out there in general. So it's having them be able to not discriminate. Like I spoke about, if they have judgments, if they have someone who's of larger size, if they perceive that someone is unmotivated, if they're lazy, if they're a slob, because one of these doctors candidly told me after marriage, she's like, you know what, I never say this, but I have different perceptions of what's wrong, like why someone can't lose weight. I was like, that's something you really need to take up and address, or maybe you should refer those patients out if you're feeling that way about these patients. Because I said, I can assure you, if you have any biases, these patients are going to know that. And the research actually states that these patients will change doctors 5 times, or they'll stop going to the doctor because you're not nurturing, empathetic, understanding of seeing people in all shapes and sizes, let alone if an office staff discriminates.
Or you can keep up disordered eating or an eating disorder in a patient. I mean, I have my own stories with my own doctor. God bless her. She probably didn't know better, and she's going to be, retired soon.
Okay.
But she was the one who initially encouraged me to lose weight when I was 19. And I mean, I had been on diets all my life, ever since I can remember. But for a while after my mother died, I just finally could eat, I'm like, oh, finally, I'm allowed to eat what I want. And I tasted McDonald's for the first time, and Nutella for the first time, and Coke for the first time. I loved it, and I went crazy for a while. And then I gained weight, and then I went to the doctor for the first time, because I only went to the doctor when I was 17. And then she always talked about weight. And when I was 21, I said, okay. And she gave me diet pills and, the whole hoopla. And, wow. I mean, for 20 years, she never questioned it. I was just a success. But I remember she often talked about food. And in my mind, this, it stuck like Velcro, because I was always on the lookout of new ways to keep my weight down, because maintenance, no one tells you about maintenance, right? Yes. And I wanted to be a success. And then every time I told her I don't want to gain weight and blah, 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 she came with something different. Interestingly enough, she must have probably had her own issues, because once she told me, yeah, you won't gain weight if you just eat, some lean meat and cottage cheese for breakfast and just no carbs. And then half a year later, she was like, yeah, why don't you do that? I do this and that for this time. And, I lost some weight. And she always kept coming back with different ideas.
It was like a diet buddy.
Yeah. But now looking back with hindsight, I see the advice was always different, and she was the one who encouraged certain behaviors. But then again, it caught her attention after I got the Ritalin for my ADHD. So she was the one who finally made clear that I had a problem, and I wasn't even aware, because how would I have known that I had a problem when I thought I was doing as I was supposed to do to be accepted in this society? So I wasn't reaching out to anyone. I wasn't talking openly about it. I was just silently suffering and exercising and trying not to eat this or that or this, and trying her stuff and other stuff, and having a ton of diet books and trying everything and combining everything. So only after I really hit rock bottom, and I wasn't anorexic to look at, but for me it was rock bottom. And only after that I realized what I have has a name. It's exercise bulimia, and there are thousands of women who have the same disorder. And for 20 years I never asked myself, and it got worse and worse. It usually starts out pretty harmless. So I have an interest in the medical field being educated about this. My interest is palpable, probably, in the way I speak about it, because, hey, someone could have saved me 20 years. You know what I mean?
I think, Merritt, many doctors are not even aware of exercise bulimia. They just want their patients to move. And then when somebody speaks about, like, oh, yeah, I went to the gym for 2 hours, and then I took, my dog on a 2-hour walk. I mean, it's like they don't think anything of it, because they see people that sit on their butts all day. And the funny thing is, I know several doctors that are compulsive exercisers and that are in their own disease, so they just think it's normal. And the other thing I want to say is, so, after I played college tennis, I competed in triathlon for 6 years, which is an eating disorder within itself.
It is.
So I learned, like, that is a complete disease. Because I always say, like, when was moving in your body greater than 45 minutes or an hour, like, not enough? Where you'd hear someone say, like, oh, I feel guilty, I only swam an hour, I have to go now run, I have to go do a brick workout, I have to swim and run, I can't do the bike today. And it's like that whole mindset.
Insane.
Oh, yeah.
But it's being celebrated.
Oh, for sure. You're praised depending on which level. Are you doing a sprint, an Olympic, a half Ironman, or an Ironman? I mean, it was like, and now to think like, I'm normal. I'm doing like 40 minutes. I mean, it was like, it became a whole, I thought like, just because I was blessed to do these different things, but it became, I thought, as you said, people praise you for it. So when these doctors hear people say they spend X amount of hours, they don't think twice about it.
No. And women and men mindlessly slip into overexercising because they are being applauded for it. Even at the top exec level, people now don't go for lunches together, but they go for sprints or endurance runs together. And I'm like, no, this is going in the wrong direction. Hello. And I know men now, and I mean over 40, and one is over 50 or close to 60, who are exercise bulimics, and they look awful. They are clearly suffering, but they're always exercising.
Yeah, I think also that the pleasure of movement's been diminished, and not to mention just wearing out different joints and muscles. And, I want to be like my 91-year-old client who swims and has nothing wrong with her and just comes in just to be proactive to see me. I want to be like that lady.
Mm-hmm. Just not get compulsive. But if you're if you're a traumatized person, or maybe some people are A types or compulsive by nature, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but maybe there are certain people like me who just something gets compulsive very easily. Like,
sure.
I start out with, let's say when I didn't do any sports when I was 17, 18. When I started out, I was like swimming for 300 meters. That's like not a lot, but I felt like an Olympic swimmer, and I was really proud. And then I didn't notice really how it got more and more. But I had a year, like I don't know when it was, maybe 5 years ago, when I swam 4 kilometers and I still felt like I hadn't done enough. And there was this point of diminishing returns, like, how does my body really like that? Not at all.
Yeah.
How does this benefit my health? Not at all. How does this influence my day in a positive way? Not at all, because you go swim for 4 kilometers, you're busy for 2 hours or longer, going there and going back and thinking about it and still feeling like you've not done enough. It takes over. And so does the obsessing about food, and every so-called success you have gets to be the new standard, and you kind of grow into this impossible realm of you don't ever reach the carrot that hangs in front of your nose, that someone once told you that once you reach the carrot, you're going to be fine and you're going to have peace of mind. And everything you do is the one thing that takes your peace of mind away. And you don't realize it until you kind of hit rock bottom.
Well, I think, as you said, Merritt, it's like the bar keeps elevating. And totally. I think learning how to create a shade of gray versus being so black or white.
How do you help people with that? Because all of a sudden, for somebody who once was happy to go for a half-hour walk, maybe now is obsessed with going only for a 2-hour walk, and then you have to kind of talk them back and remind them that there once was a time when they were completely happy with 30 minutes, and that was a complete success. And maybe they're now afraid of doing less than 2 hours.
It's nice to explore with the individual other activities they like that are not activities that are movement and food related. So whether it's, watching movies or meditating or
reading, painting, whatever.
Yeah.
Petting
knitting,
animals.
Playing with your dog. I mean, so I try to, with the different, clinicians that I collaborate with, find other activities that can be woven into their day-to-day life, because certainly mood is altered, but also I think physical aches and pains down the road, I can say from my own aches and pains that have erupted over time. And, I always like to say, Merritt, in my brain, I feel like I'm 15, but in the last couple years, like, oh, wow, I have
Who's
this.
that in
now.
the mirror? Yeah, I get the same experience.
So it's learning how to, my thing is like aging gracefully and not being injured. So being able to manage these problems and find other activities perhaps you once used to do and you have forgotten about.
Mm-hmm. But how do we deal with the anxiety then? Because people who do paint instead of exercise, when they're exercise addicts, they're going to feel awful.
Right,
painting.
Because they want something physical.
Yeah.
Well, and also I think that's where the meditation and the journaling and being able to learn how to sit with those feelings comes out. So I know as a nutrition therapist, I collaborate with, a therapist or psychologist. It's not just me because I know where my role begins and where it ends.
Yeah. And I can say that therapy really helps, but it takes, as you said, it takes a routine. And I mean, I go twice a week. I have to go twice a week. Yeah. And the consistency is really what does the trick. And I think a lot of people think they can go like 5 or 10 times and then that's it. But I mean, I've gone for years and this intensive only for the last 1.5 years. And slowly, painfully slowly, stuff is starting to shift. For example, I now know that I can do no exercise and when the anxiety comes up. And I mean, I can still do exercise if I want to, but I know now that this fear that previously was so clearly related to weight gain, I must do this in order to avoid weight gain. I knew rationally that it wasn't really about the weight because it cannot be that this is a reason to not live your life or to, avoiding the perceived pain of being in a bigger body by inflicting pain on myself every day for real. To get away from a pain that is only projected and not even here yet. So I knew that on a rational level, but now when the anxiety comes up, when I don't exercise, I now know better. And I feel it better that it's really not about the weight. It's about something much deeper. Yeah. And it always is. And you cannot just, read your way through books and find out your deepest hurts and process them. It's just not humanly possible to just find out really and be in a caring environment and looking at those traumas, whatever they are, big trauma, small trauma. I'm not categorizing anything, but there must be...
it's probably letting you sit with those feelings and those inner gremlins more so now that you're not, quote unquote, exercising it away.
Mm-hmm. I still do it a lot though, but I know when my gremlin says, yeah, but now you're going to gain weight and blah, 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 it's going to be terrible. I feel much more stable in quietly saying back to the gremlin, I'm not that afraid of weight anymore, really. So I've kind of peeled back another layer and I see that the anxiety that comes up is not really about the weight, but it's about something that relates to self-worth, it relates to loneliness, it relates to fear of vulnerability, and not really about weight at all. And I think that's true for most people. There's a fear underneath that of rejection, of, participating in life and its truths. Them being, we will all die, we will all get hurt, we will all experience loss, and no amount of exercise or no skinny jean size or whatever will save us from that. The thing that's being promised that you'll never have an unhappy relationship again, or that you will always have hot sex all the time, and that you'll never lose anybody and you will get every job. It's simply not true.
Well, those are all Band-Aids.
Yes. Life is not predictable. No matter what jeans you're wearing, no matter how much you're exercising or not exercising or not doing. Because you have ultimately given your power away over all these choices, because it is somewhat scary to realize that you're the pilot of your own ship. I'm no one's guru. You have to find out your own values and decisions. And that's sort of, scary. For me, like I was always just on the lookout to, keep people safe. And I was living in a traumatic environment when I was a kid. So for me, my own choices never really mattered. And all of a sudden I'm a grown-up woman and I'm like, what do I really want? I don't know. Can I make choices? So it's really heavy to realize that I'm the captain of this boat and no one gets to make my choices. And just because someone else says eating paleo made them healthier, A, doesn't mean that is true for me. And B, if I don't feel like villainizing some grains, then I'm not going to do it, because there's no universal truth in all of those topics for anyone out there. And we've just stopped listening to our own voices, I think.
I was going to say it's a lot of work and effort to learn how to be acquainted, let alone reacquainted with our body. I always like to say to clients, like, body meet merit, merit meet body.
Yeah, good point.
Oh, it's nice to meet you. I haven't had a chance to get to be reacquainted with you. It's been a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a lot of patients or do you find out about a lot of trauma when you're working with clients? Is that a connection that is often the case between disordered eating and people being hurt a lot?
Absolutely. I think the first thing, of course, is to, establish a rapport with anyone that I'm working with. And I see individuals with all types of eating disorders. I see people with, anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, chewing and spitting, laxative and diuretic abuse, BED, and compulsive exercise. And I always like to say, as each layer of the onion unfolds, really, that certainly comes up. Oftentimes, when I'm asking about different particular incidences, then that comes up because I think that's really buried deep. And perhaps from their therapist or psychologist, that might be something that's disclosed, and they may say, don't bring that up. Let the client share that with you. But I have found that it seems to be more prevalent with my female clients than my male clients, and I have a number of clients that engage in self-harm as well. More of the clients I see with bulimia nervosa. But I think to merit, I think the key thing is, for the client to trust me and know that I'm going to be there for them to be able to disclose something so sacred to them, which brings up so many deep, deep feelings.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the thing that, decides over whether or not somebody will be successful in their recovery? Because I have some listeners that have made great progress, or so they say. They write to me, and I don't know them personally, nor am I in any position to help, but there are certain people amongst them that have started to, engage in challenges again and cleanses that are very much speaking of an eating disorder. So I was just saddened to see how easily people can fall back into old behaviors that they had given up for a while maybe, and then still they didn't have the strength to talk back to old Eddie in the bus, as Tom Rutledge said.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I think what can determine one to be successful from, I always like to say for my female clients, Edwina, versus my male clients, Ed, is that
eating disorder. Yeah, just for people listening who didn't get it.
Of course, thank you. That they actively have a full eating disorder treatment team. So maybe, Merritt, like some of these individuals who are listening to your show don't have a treatment team, and they will take on various challenges. I always like to say it's like you're riding the waves of the ocean. You're going up and down, which is very common in day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I'm no different. I don't want to put myself in any saint's position. I notice those waves as well, just saying.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. So some meals or some days will go better than others. And what I like to do with clients is break it down to meal by meal, because that can be less anxiety provoking. So it's like, in 12 step, they tend to say one day at a time. I like to go one meal at a time, because there's so much anxiety in day-to-day life to begin with, that I'm looking at how to reduce the stress and anxiety for each individual, and to treat each eating experience as a learning experience in regards to what we would or wouldn't do differently the next time, without being judgmental or critical to ourselves. So when you'll discuss someone being enticed, if I heard you correctly, about like a cleanse, for example,
or an exercise challenge.
Yes, to be able to look at how so there's something I like to use with clients called a rethinking sheet. You have the feeling that automatically comes out. Maybe your feeling is, oh, you know what? I'm feeling fat. So your automatic thought is, you know what? I'm feeling overwhelmed. My boss told me something at work that I didn't want to hear. So that's your automatic thought. And then basically your healthy voice is, well, if I were to do this exercise challenge, is that going to be supportive in allowing me to move forward in healing my relationship with exercise? Well, maybe if I went to that restorative yoga class instead, where I could focus on gentle movement, because I don't feel ready to give up any kind of movement at this place. So I'll do something like that with clients to allow them to move forward. And many of the clients I see, Merritt, have a hard time bringing up what that healthy voice would be, since I would say most of them can bring out that automatic negative or eating disorder voice, and the feeling is what's really on the surface, and they could just lash out speaking about. But I do think it's ideal to be able to have a treatment team that they are collaborating with, on a regular basis. And I realize not everybody can afford weekly, so maybe it's bi-weekly, but I love to be able to create goals with each person that I'm working with, that they have constant areas that they are focusing on before I see them for the next time.
I think you're totally right. It must be a lack of a consistent treatment team often, because it seems like those few people that I'm referring to are not even asking themselves the question, what is the real meaning behind this inner gremlin yell, you're fat, you got to do something. That's not, this is not the truth. What is beneath that? I don't think they're asking themselves the question. They just kind of obey. Like, ooh, old lady in the back yelled something and I'm going to have to obey this. So it's hard to even interfere, and you just got to have to watch people fall back. Yeah. And I'm not saying that I'm a saint, as I said, but it's just, that usually pains me to see that there's still so much in the grip of something and not really living their life, or not really maybe acknowledging the real pain that is there. So all I can do is probably work on myself, because we can always just work on ourselves and hopefully infect someone else, but it's none of my business what someone else does.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Well, when one's ready.
But with that person in mind, I would also really want you to break down the myth about, quote unquote, having to cut out carbs or low carb or whatever carb panic there has been roused. First of all, I mean, I love bread. I'm Swiss. We have the best bread in the world.
Yeah,
and we really do. And I love pasta. I love those typical carbs, that have been villainized as if they were dangerous for our bodies. And listen, I have cut out carbs for years. And I have, in the beginning, of course, whatever you do, a new diet, of course it worked in the beginning. And I felt like, yeah, that's the recipe. No carbs or low carb. And it worked for a while, but no, of course it didn't work long term. It didn't at all. I felt so much weaker and colder and more irritable for sure, and more anxious. My muscles hurt all the time. My joints hurt. But I had this anxiety inside that I've listened to this whole low carb craze for so long, that until like 2 years ago, I still had this anxiety that maybe just better steer clear of them. They might really just put on the weight and blah. And so I think we can all use someone to just once and for all de-villainize carbs for all of us.
Sure. It's funny, Merritt, when you said being in Switzerland, I was there, I think I mentioned to you a long time ago, and I thought to myself, oh, Switzerland, Germany, the best breads and jams I've ever had.
Oh man, the crusty real bread.
Yes.
You know what? You will never, ever, ever touch Wonder Bread or its dirty cousins again if you have eaten Swiss bread. Yeah.
The best.
Thanks for acknowledging that.
Now that we have that understanding, so maybe you'll ship me a loaf. Okay, so
I don't know if that's going to not be moldy when it's there.
I was going to say it might not come out as delicious as I vividly remember.
Yeah, feel invited though.
I'll have to plan that. Okay, so I always like to say, carbohydrates are the gasoline that fuel your car. Well, when you think of a marathon runner, you don't think of at each mile they're grabbing a breast of chicken. They're having a piece of a banana or a bagel or an orange. It's the gasoline that essentially enters your bloodstream and provides fuel for the brain.
They eat pasta all the time.
So bread, rice, pasta, cereal, crackers, popcorn, starchy vegetables, potatoes, corn, peas, yams. And this is necessary for your nervous system and for muscle activity.
Even if you're not athletic, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. So just all of us, that's the foundation. That's the bulk of what we need in day-to-day life. So this is our body's preferred source of energy and our primary source of energy, actually. So our body resists storing it as fat. And I think that's a myth people perceive eating carbohydrates makes us fat, since, other fuel sources will take the priority. And if there's a lack of carbohydrate, your body uses up our stored energy in the muscles, and glycogen, which is so glucose is what carbohydrates are broken down into, but then the additional form is known as glycogen, and it'll then use protein, including your body's protein, and then muscles and tissues and organs for energy.
That's why everybody feels so terrible who doesn't eat carbs and maybe even exercise. Yes.
Right. And then they increase their caffeine due to the lack of carbohydrates in their diet.
Right. That's what I did. Smoking and caffeine. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's basically like the diet of a supermodel, sadly.
Right. And that increases cortisol levels, which stresses us out, which leads us to gain weight.
Correct. So we basically want to have the larger amount of our diet be derived from carbohydrates. And it doesn't matter, just to kind of keep it simplified, if it's, complex or simple. It's like carbohydrate. It's all sugar in the end. So when I hear people say to me, oh, is this high glycemic? Is it low glycemic? The bottom line is, if it's whole grain and high fiber, it's going to fill you up sooner and sustain you longer. And honestly, it's nice to be able to have regular white pasta. It doesn't have to be quinoa pasta, or have the one that you like.
Before we even ask those questions, because someone fed us those ideas about, low glycemic and this and that and this and that, we just ate stuff. Like my grandmother and my grandfather, they were 90, they ate everything and sugary, and they were healthy. They were not overweight. They were not even sporty. They were fine. They didn't stress themselves out all the time, asking themselves what the content of a specific food was. Imagine the stress we're putting ourselves under these days.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about as a kid growing up in the 70s, having my Fritos and Pepperidge Farm Milano cookies with my sandwich every day. We didn't have these organic, gluten-free, natural chips and cookies. I had the generic Frito-Lay and Pepperidge Farm brands, and I think I turned out okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think we have to recognize that this is just coming from, a very capitalistic society and structure that, you can sell anything that promises some sort of peace of mind or recognition or applause, and, call it whatever you want to, and it will sell. Tell the people that they should live like their ancestors, and they go and villainize grains, or they go and villainize sugar when, which is ridiculous. We don't live like them. We are here, we are now. And I can only think of my grandparents to keep myself sane, because they just ate stuff and they were fine.
I think being stressed is worse than just having it.
It's the same thing with weight stigma. Is a lot more detrimental to a person in a bigger body than the actual bigger body. That's what they found out, with health at every size and all their studies. That's a huge stressor.
Correct. It's like, I don't know if you've seen, Merit, from, they have this great little video of poodle science.
Yes.
I love that.
Tell my audience about it.
It's, I was going to say that the dog, it's not a pit bull, it's a dog that's just a genetically larger build, basically. You wouldn't have, I'm going to use a pit bull. It's not a pit bull. I'm forgetting what the dog is. But anyways, trying to have a pit bull be the size of a poodle. So they do this in a little cartoon video. You could type in on YouTube poodle science, and it's fantastic because it proves the point that we all have a certain genetic build, and trying to honor what our genetic build is and not conforming what, you're not going to compare yourself to this next person. And this is, it's a mastiff dog.
Thanks.
So you wouldn't try to make a mastiff look like a poodle. And with that, they show all the genetics and like what would happen if you put a mastiff on the starvation diet. It would look sickly. And it's honoring like the size that the mastiff is and honoring the size that the poodle is. And how come our culture basically just can't honor and accept like where our bodies are. And I think that really is, I think, a point, home to my heart and would be just fantastic in like healthcare, honoring where our bodies are at, because I wouldn't have a pit bull or a Great Dane trying to be a Chihuahua.
Yeah. They bred so much insecurity into us ever since, our childhoods that we think that our like mastiffness is not good and we all have to look like fucking greyhounds.
Yeah.
When the real truth is we are the same species. We are dogs. We are humans. That's it. We are not all golden retrievers and we are not all Giselle Bündchen. And the truth is that Giselle Bündchen is no shit happier than we are. Since we are human beings and we can read and we are easily made insecure, then if someone tells us that she lives a better life, then we think, oh my God, maybe if I look like her, I get this. Which is the same if a dog were insecure enough being a mastiff and maybe thinking that he should look like a poodle. But of course they are smarter on a soul level, Why would any particular race try and be like another?
Well, and also I think it sort of falls back into the diet mentality, like, oh, if I eat what this model or this actress eats, my body will change. And it gives us this false belief. It's the fantasy that my body will conform and I'll look like this person then.
Yeah,
which is,
just because a mastiff gets the same diet like the greyhound, it will never look like a greyhound. Maybe it'll be is sick because it needs another food or another amount of food.
Right, it's falling for the bait.
Right. Oh my God, there's so much stuff to unpack. Just let everyone know what you are doing with your business and how they can find you.
So I have a private practice in Beverly Hills I've had for the last 19 years where I see kids, teens, tweens, and adults with body image issues, medical issues, eating disorders, and really like to help people heal their relationship with food. And my website is askaboutfood.com.
Let me ask a pre-final question. If you had one piece of advice for everybody, what would that be?
Listening to your heart and keeping the horse blinders on and listening to what your heart tells you and trying to really isolate yourself from all of those external voices, because it can be very difficult to maneuver through the dieting world that we live in. It's definitely a challenging place these days, more so. It seems like each year becomes more and more difficult. I can see in the 19 years that I've been in practice, so really listening to your heart and your internal voice. That would be the one thing I would say. And also trying to take yourself back to that safe space. And if you don't have a safe space, trying to locate one.
Mm-hmm. And let me just yell in, you are okay being a mastiff. It's okay. You know what I mean?
Loving your mastiff.
Yeah, loving your mastiffness. Now, my final question to you is, what would you like to be remembered for?
I would like to be remembered for that I'm a person of my word and that I would never, ever compromise my values for a quick fix.
I love that. That's brilliant. Thank you.
It was great, Merritt. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everything that you do for your listeners.
Thank you.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.